Assalamu alaikum again. My voice is not 100%, but I know that I can count on your generosity to overlook it. Innal hamdalillahi nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu. Indeed, all praise belongs to Allah. We praise Him and we ask Him for help and we ask Him for forgiveness. Of the 6,236 verses of the Quran, about 750 or 1/8 of the book exhorts believers to reflect on nature, to study the relationship between living organisms and their environment, and to maintain the balance and proportion that Allah has built into His creation. Thus, in the water that comes down from the sky, giving life to the earth after it had been lifeless, in the hives of the bees and the flight of the birds, in the wonder of the seas, in the spring that gush forth from within the earth. In these and similar Quranic verses, Allah reminds us that there are messages for those who reason and think. The earth's resources, air, water, land, forests, minerals, are available for our use, but these gifts come from Allah, with certain ethical restraints. We may use them to meet our needs, but only in a way that does not upset the ecological balance and that does not compromise the ability of future generations to meet their needs. These Quranic verses take on special significance in the light of today's climate crisis, the most serious existential threat that we have ever faced. So the theme of my khutbah today is how to meet the challenge of the climate crisis in the light of Islam. Consider this verse from Surah Rum, chapter 30, verse 41. Zahar al-fasadu fil barri wal bahri bima kasabat aydin nasi liyuziqahum ba'd allazi amilu la'allahum yarji'un. Corruption has appeared on land and sea as an outcome of what man's hands have wrought. And so He will let them taste the evil of some of their doings so that they might return to the right path. Over 1400 years ago, the Quran warned us that destruction of the natural environment follows from immoral and unethical use of natural resources. Has there been a more precise definition of the climate crisis than we face today than this Quranic verse? The Quran reminds us that with crisis comes responsibility, the need for believers to translate their faith into action. In Surah Al-An'am, chapter 6, verse 165, we read, وَهُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَكُمْ خَلَائِفَ الْأَرْضِ. It is He who has appointed you His Khalifa or trustee on the earth. Trusteeship requires that we care for the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the land that we inhabit, and also care for all the living beings that we share the planet with, the trees, the birds, the animals. For believers, this is not an option but a religious obligation. It is also one of the most profound ways by which we can thank Allah. Consider one major aspect of the climate crisis: carbon emission. Carbon dioxide is one of the main greenhouse gases, along with methane and nitrous oxide. When these gases accumulate in the atmosphere, they trap the sunlight that is reflected from the earth and radiate it back. This is what causes global warming, that causes the polar ice cap to melt, drowning the coastal areas and increasing the number of climate refugees. For perspective, consider this. Global greenhouse emissions are now running at about 40 billion tons a year. Consider also this. With a population of about 360 million, the US has less than 5% of the world's population of over 7.2 billion. But we emit more than 25% of the greenhouse gases, second only to China. I need a little bit of water, please. What can remove the poisonous carbon dioxide from the environment? One of the most visible signs of Allah's creation his ayah, is a living entity that we see every day, that we take for granted. It is the tree, from the humble thistle to the soaring redwood. If only we could see inside the tree. The root takes water from the earth, sends it up the trunk against gravity through capillary force to the leaves, and the leaves, with the green pigment that makes it green, the chlorophyll, takes in sunlight and carbon dioxide from the air, mixes them up, and separates the carbon, the poisonous element, from the oxygen, stores it in its trunk, and breathes out the oxygen that we breathe to survive. So, what a marvelous, magnificent feat of chemical engineering photosynthesis is, one that could only have been designed by the Creator. Planting trees is, of course, one of the ways you can help remove the poisonous carbon from the air. But that will require billions of trees to absorb enough carbon to mitigate the threat of global warming. So it is natural to ask, what difference does it make if you and I plant 1 or 2 trees in our backyard, or maybe 100 or 200 trees in our property here? But that is the wrong question to ask. Because if each one of us plant a tree with the intention of fulfilling our obligation as Allah's trustee on earth, it can change our heart. Because before we can change the world, or we can mitigate the effect of climate crisis, we have to change our hearts. So if you and I, first in ones and tens, and then hundreds and thousands, and then hundreds and thousands, we plant trees with the idea of fulfilling Allah's command to earth to act as his Khalifa, then it is possible that you can start mitigating the effect of climate crisis. We can decarbonize the carbon energy system and go from fossil fuel to renewable energy like the sun and the wind. Remember also what the Prophet said 1400 years ago, that if you sense that the day of resurrection is about to begin, and you have a plant in your hand, go ahead and plant it. Right? So what he said was, if you sense that the day of resurrection is about to begin, and you have a sapling in your hand, still go ahead and plant it. So at the individual level, we have to do our best to mitigate the climate crisis. But another goal must be also to make our Evergreen Islamic Center a leader in climate innovation. But how do we do that? By making connections with all other organizations that are doing in the same goal. Also by supporting politicians and leaders who are trying to move us away from dependence on fossil fuel and going for renewable energy. At EIC, at Evergreen Islamic Center, we have religious committee, operations committee, finance committee, but we also have got to create a climate committee. And while the elders who are passionate about climate change, this committee must be led by the young people of our community, because they are the ones who are going to inherit the effect of climate crisis on earth. From now onwards, expect to see in the year 2020 and thereafter many events related to climate crisis at our center, not just talks and lectures, but also practical demonstrations about how we can reduce our carbon footprint. We also must encourage our youth, girls and boys who are in the high schools and colleges, to become climate scientists and environmentalists. At this critical juncture, we need lawyers and engineers, of course, but at this critical juncture, what we need most are climate scientists and environmentalists. Most of you have heard the name of Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old Swedish student and activist who was the catalyst for launching the youth climate strike around the world this year. Guess what? We have at least a dozen Greta Thunbergs in our community who are looking for just a little bit of encouragement and inspiration to take on the challenge of the climate crisis. The climate crisis is a moral crisis. It is a spiritual crisis. And because of such crisis that we face as Muslims, we always return to the original source of guidance, the Quran. In the Quran, we have complete confidence in Allah's mercy that He will give us the tools if we have the right intention to rise up to the challenge of the climate crisis. In Surah Yusuf and other places, He tells us that those who despair of Allah's mercy are disbelievers. So we must learn that when we take care of the planet, we are also taking care of ourselves. A lesson that was known to our parents, our grandparents, and our great-grandparents, because unlike us, they lived close to the land. So this is also one of the most profound ways by which we can thank Allah. Climate crisis being a spiritual and moral crisis, climate scientists have calculated that unless we reach zero carbon emission by 2050, the daily life will be a hellish life. Can we do this? Can we reach zero carbon emission by 2050? No one can say for sure. But the fact is, most of us, the senior members of this community, will not be around, unlikely to be around in the year 2050. That is why it is imperative that the youth of our community take over the challenge of facing the climate crisis by acting as Allah's Khalifas on earth. Today, particularly, the entire country is flooded with ads for what is called Black Friday. It is a relentless call to increase consumption. But we also must know that when we increase consumption, we worsen the climate crisis because we end up consuming products that are made with fossil fuel. At the very least, we must resist the temptation to be a part of the shopping frenzy that seems to grip otherwise sensible and sane people. But let's look at the origin of the word Black Friday. The way it is used now, the word black is meant to suggest that stores are going to be in the black. That means they're going to make a profit by selling stuff that we really don't need, buying with money that we really don't have, to impress people that we don't really like. That's the real truth. So, but the origin of the two words is much darker. The Black Friday was exactly 150 years ago, in 1869, speculators drove up the price of gold, causing the stock market to crash. It was on a Friday. That's why it is called Black Friday, meaning bad. But for us, Friday is the holiest day of the week. It is the day of the Jumu'ah, the day of assembly, when we gather to thank Allah for all the deserved and undeserved blessings of our life. So I want to conclude, after a pause, I want to conclude what our responsibilities are in terms of facing up to the climate crisis, the most existential threat that mankind has ever faced. The climate crisis is, as I have said, a moral crisis and a spiritual crisis. But Allah gives us the tools to face up to this reality by acting as His Khalifa on earth. So we ask Allah to make each one of us His Khalifa on earth, to care for the air that we breathe, the land that we inhabit, the water that we drink, the living beings that we share the planet with, the birds, the animals, the trees. We ask Allah that even though we Muslims constitute only about 2 to 3% of America's population, that if we act as Allah's Khalifa on earth, our impact on mitigating the climate crisis will be as if we are at least 10% or more. Because aiming high is the hallmark of a believer. We ask Allah to inspire our youth so that they can become climate scientists and environmentalists, directly translating their faith into action. Above all, we ask Allah that whatever we do, we are driven by one goal and one goal only, and that is to gain His good pleasure. Gaining the good pleasure of Allah is the only way we can give meaning and purpose to our lives. Rabbana alayka tawakkalna wa ilayka anabna wa ilayka al-masir. Our Lord, on you we have put our trust, to you we have returned in repentance, and to you is our final destination. Ameen. Amin.